we had an intriguing conversation about the campaign to get Robert Buckland, the Attorney General, member of the Cabinet, very, very senior Tory, to review the sentence on PC Andrew Harper. You'll recall that they wanted to prosecute those three people for murder, but they were only found guilty of manslaughter by the jury, and the sentences accordingly went in. Andrew's family said that it was ridiculous, the level of sentences that were handed down, asked Buckland to consider it, and he is doing that right now. They have officially confirmed that on Tuesday, I think they said that they would be considering it. What's now kicked in as well is that there's mounting pressure on the Attorney General, because this would be a government decision, not one by the judges, that the general rule, if you're sentenced to 10 years, then you only have to serve 3 or 4 before you're immediately entitled to appeal, as opposed to being given a sentence where there's a minimum directive for something terribly serious and you will do 25 years come what may before you can be considered for parole. Some are for it, some are against it, and I'm delighted to be joined by excellent examples of both. Ayesha Nayyar, who's the principal solicitor at Nayyar's Solicitor, says criminals should be serving the full sentence. Judges don't have the scope to give tougher sentences. Ending the reduction is much needed. Richard Wright QC, who's the leader of the North Eastern Circuit as a barrister, takes a different view. So I'm going to ask both of you to state why you think what you do, and then let's get into the debate. So, Ayesha, why is it right that we should get tougher on sentencing?
Well, the criminal justice system at present just isn't tough enough, and I've been advocating this for a long time. We need longer prison sentences. We need tougher prisons. The public have lost faith in the system. Now, just going to the point that you raised earlier, the government plans, or I hope, will end this automatic entitlement to a third reduction in a guilty if you enter a guilty plea as a criminal. And remember, once a criminal is sentenced and they go to prison, they end up getting 50% off their time in prison as well. They automatically will come out and serve the rest of the time out in the community. So my view is, let's get tough. If you go to prison, you serve the right amount of time. And what's all this? You've committed a crime. Why should we give reductions on guilty pleas?
Richard Wright QC, I'm going to add just one observation. I'm not taking sides in this argument because I don't, but one other observation to Ayesha Nayyar is that all of the opinion polls, and it may just be in the wake of the young police officer being killed, but public opinion is absolutely behind this.
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying that obviously the killing of Andrew Harper was a terrible offence, and it's one that quite properly has led to an outpouring of public support and emotion for his family. But experience tends to suggest that changing the law in response to the decision in a single case is normally something that leads to the creation of bad laws. There are a number of issues here. The first is how long people actually serve in prison of their sentence. And just to correct something that's just been said, the government's already changed the law so that anyone receiving a long sentence now has to serve 2/3 of it. I think that the other point is about whether you should reduce a sentence if somebody pleads guilty. It's not right to say that everyone automatically gets a third off. If you plead guilty at the very first opportunity, there is a reduction in sentence of 1/3, and that reduces to just 10% if you plead guilty on the day of your trial. Is that an important principle, that the sentence should be reduced if people plead guilty? In my view, it absolutely is, because it incentivizes people to admit their guilt.
All right, Ayesha, come back in on that. So, part of the implication is you haven't quite got your facts right, but the other is that there is discretion already built into the system.
Well, I have got my facts right, because it's only for the violent offences that he's talking about the reduction. Across the board, there is normally a reduction for an early guilty plea. Look, let's use the example of somebody who commits a hideous murder and is caught red-handed at the police station. They hold their hands up and they admit their guilt. You've got a third reduction. Should you, if you've been caught red-handed? For me, it doesn't sit right, the reduction of a third. That's at that early stage. Maybe we could have some reduction, but it's got to be, if what's happening at the moment is criminals are sitting back and waiting to see what the evidence is against them. And if it stacks up at that stage, they might throw the towel in. And in terms of incentivising, well, at the moment, what we seem to be doing is we're rewarding good behaviour. Let's punish bad behaviour. Why don't we change the system to, if you plead not guilty and then you're found guilty, you'll get the maximum sentence, we'll increase the sentence. So at the moment, what we seem to be doing is you've committed an offence, you've admitted it, oh, well done. Let's reduce your sentence. Why don't we flip it? Why don't we say, you plead not guilty, we go to trial, and I can warn you now, if you're found guilty by a jury, you'll get a longer sentence. So my view is that the balance seems to be stacked in favour of the criminal as opposed to the victim. And I act for lots of victims in crimes.
Richard, do come back by all means on what Ayesha was just saying, but let me add another point to it, because in a sense, she didn't state it, but it's an obvious conclusion from what she was saying, is that a guilty plea being matched with a slightly smaller sentence, as much as anything, is to take the burden and the pressure off the courts so that more cases can get through. I mean, I had a lawyer on the other day saying that there's about 500,000 backlog at the moment of cases. So is it a trade-off in making justice still fair but cheaper by saying, yeah, if you say you put your hand up, then you'll get less of a sentence?
There's obviously an effect that if more people plead guilty, it's cheaper to run the justice system because you don't need to run trials. But that's not why we have the reduction. And I think that's actually to look at the issue through a very narrow compass. Let's think about this from the perspective of the victims of crime, so the people who are actually affected by it. If offenders plead guilty, first of all, there's a public acknowledgement that the allegation made against them is true. So they're admitting publicly that they have offended against that person. Secondly, if an offender pleads guilty, they are sparing the witnesses and very often the victims from having to go to court, give evidence, be cross-examined, and repeat their ordeal in court. So that's a second significant advantage to the victims of crime of incentivising people to plead guilty at an early opportunity. And thirdly, this links in with the point about delay. It means that cases are dealt with more quickly, and that is in the best interests of victims and wider society, because what people do not want when they've been the victim of crime is to wait 12, 18 months, 2 years for the case that affected them to be resolved. And so the incentive, if you like, to plead guilty isn't just about rewarding criminals, as it's been characterised. It's actually about ensuring you have an effective justice system that means that cases are resolved expeditiously, and that's in the best interests of victims of crime and wider society.
Let me put one final thing to you, Richard, and then I'll go back to Ayesha for her final thought as well, if I may. Do you, as a QC, and I've had this point made to me very sharply and quite rightly, that Buckland, as Attorney General, although he's a senior Tory in the Cabinet, what have you, will be having to make this decision, but also the decision more significantly on Andrew Harper's sentence. He'll have to do that with his lawyer's hat on, as it were, rather than it being a political decision. Do you think that the government will do what you recommend or what Ayesha is arguing for?
Well, I hope that the government sits back, reflects upon the public statements that have been made in the heat of the moment following a particularly emotive case, and actually reflects on why we have had in this country for many, many years a system of incentivising the early resolution of cases by guilty pleas.
Ayesha, is this not the worst possible time to make such a change, as Richard suggests?
Well, Richard talked about it being an emotive case, but sadly, these cases are common and the public are frustrated at what we see. One thing I can add is you talked about victims. Well, I can tell you very clearly, and in this particular case, it happened, the victims are stressed from the fact that it causes an incredible amount of stress and upset and heartache when they see justice not being done because sentences, so Henry Long, 16 years, all the way down to 10 years and 8 months because he pleaded guilty. That in itself causes a lot of heartache, stress, and upset with the criminal justice system.
And we lost a little bit of sound there at the moment. Can you hear me, Ayesha?
I can hear you.
Okay. Then finally, in a very brief sentence, do you think Buckland will do it?
I hope he will do it. That's
I know you hope he will. Do you think he will?
No, I've got no faith. I think the criminal justice system is in a mess, to be honest, and I think there's so many different factors that need to be sorted. Fingers crossed, but no, I've got no faith in it.
Great discussion. Thank you both. I know you took very, very strongly opposing views, but for doing it so elegantly and so calmly. That's Ayesha Nayyar and Richard Wright, who disagree on whether automatic reductions in sentencing should be abolished, but both agreeing that probably the Attorney General would not do it.